Hey, what's up, party people? It's your old pal F here again for another episode of F Bombs, the place where I drag out an old yarn from either the animation industry itself or from my personal experiences in the animation industry. So let's light another wick on one of these bad boys and get her underway. Before I begin, of course, it would be remiss of me to leave out the fact that the reason I'm even doing these is so that we can generate watch hours for this channel so that this channel can become monetized so that I can start paying the many independent animators I've got working for me on Fountain's Pen Cartoons, the very channel that you're watching right now. We've got a whole bunch of really cool stuff coming out in the very near future, and it's of a wide variety of things. It's not just one thing. Um, Fountain's Pen Cartoon Channel is going to be a variety show of sorts. So there's going to be something for everybody. So please, um, hit like, share, subscribe, get on social media, tell the world about this place and what we're up to, because we're a really very kind of grassroots situation. It's just me and a bunch of people who wanted to make cartoons, and not just artists, but also people who are helping out with voices and sound and production and everything else. I gotta say, I gotta take a moment to shout out to all of the production crew, because it's really easy to get involved with something like this and be one of the artists. Because of course, as an artist, you can hold up, a drawing or something that you did and go, hey, look what I did. But the production people are there, allowing doing everything else that needs to be done that the artists, probably could do. But if they did that, they wouldn't be spending their time drawing. So, we've got over 200 people, and like I said, they're not all artists. There's just a variety of people, and I really want to get this channel monetized for that reason. And the only way to do that right now, we've got the minimum subscription count, but what we need are watch hours. So, do me a favor, go to all the F bombs, go to the Chasing the Nightmare podcast, watch those from beginning to end, because every time we rack up another hour, we're a step closer to being monetized. So, just please support the channel. It costs you absolutely nothing, and even if heaven forbid you don't want to watch the entirety of any of these shows, including this one, um, just let it run on your phone. It's all the same to us. So, please support the channel. As I've said, once we get monetized, um, I'm not going to keep a dime of it until everybody else gets paid. So, I'm the very last person who's ever going to see a dime from any of this. And look, we've all got very realistic expectations. If none of us make any money, we're doing it because we love it and we're doing it for the experience. The whole reason I set this thing up was to be a mentorship program for people who needed to gain experience so that they could hopefully move on in their careers in the animation industry. And they were all struggling with that, paradox of you can't get a job without experience and you can't get experience without a job. Well, I don't have, the piles of cash sitting around to pay people, but what I do have is the ability to give them experience. And so that's how we're doing this. And we're having a blast, we're having a great time, but it would just mean the world to have your support in the way of subscriptions and likes and shares and all that stuff. So please do what you can. All right, I will stop at the pitch at this point. So, what I thought I'd talk about today was one of a handful of run-ins I had with animation royalty. Okay, now as you can see by the original Poochie artwork back there from The Simpsons, I've also run into Matt Groening. That's another story for another time. But for those of you who have been asking about that, yes, that is a drawing of Poochie, and yes, it is an original Matt Groening drawing. So I'll tell the story about that for another time. But anyway, when when I first moved to LA and became an animator, I had always, called myself a cartoonist, but I never really called myself an animator because I never went to school for animation. I never studied it. I had the most rudimentary understanding of how it was done, but I was suddenly surrounded by people who went to animation school, and I was surrounded by people who had spent their whole lives studying animation, not just as an art form, but the history of it all and all that stuff. So, yeah, so, I like I said, growing up, anytime on The Wonderful World of Disney, which just goes to show how old I am, that was a show that I watched. It was a weekly thing that I think they ran on ABC, and this was before Disney owned them and all that stuff. It was a weekly show where it was a Wonderful World of Disney, and they would do short documentaries every year. Now and again, they would show goofy cartoons, which I just absolutely loved. But a lot of times they would take you behind the scenes at Disney, and they would show people, animating, and they would show how it was done and all that stuff. And I loved that stuff. Like, I absolutely adored that stuff, and I would seek it out wherever I could find it. But that is the extent of my, animation education. I never, I didn't go beyond that. And then when I got to college, every now and then there would be a video that would come out, the making of such and such, and I would watch it, and I would marvel at it. And as I've mentioned before, I would watch these things and I would think to myself, I could see myself being a character designer or something like that. But as for animation, no thank you. Looks way too tedious, looks way too hard. I want nothing to do with it. Not knowing anything about storyboarding or directing or anything like that. So, again, I was only a little bit aware of the sort of history of the craft. And of course, I had my favorite animators, Chuck Jones, Friz Freleng, all those guys were people that I admired tremendously. And I could recognize their work, and I sort of came to understand, their different senses of humor and that sort of thing. So again, it's not that I was ignorant of legacy animators, but I didn't have a sense of the, lore that everybody else had who had gone to either Sheridan or Cal Arts or Laguna College of Art and Design or blah 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 blah, any of those places where a lot of the great animators come from, RISD, what have you. So the point of all this being, when I got to LA, I started to learn a little bit more about this stuff, and I really started, as it became clearer and clearer as time went by, that animation was going to kind of be my bag, that this was going to be, what I did for the foreseeable future. I got really, really into it, and I started absorbing everything, and I started, what else can I learn? What else can I learn? Where did it begin? And I had already known that Winsor McCay had done some of the very first animated, cartoons, and I had seen, all this stuff. And like I said, I was seeing connections between cartooning and animation and all this stuff, and really fascinated by it. And of course, eventually, I came across these guys, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. This is basically considered the Bible of animation. If you're an animator, you have to have this book. If you don't have it in hardcover, you are looked down upon by everybody in the industry. And I'm going to be really, really honest with you. Even though I have, I've absorbed a lot of the things in this book, and my goodness, there's so much, there's so much beautiful stuff in here. And yeah, I mean, geez, just even the most basic of it, it's an absolutely gorgeous book, and I do believe it is something every animator should have. I have never read this thing cover to cover, so that's my confession to you. But the point is, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, the co-authors of this book, Yep, there they are. Yeah. Um, they were, um, they were amongst a group of Disney's key guys called the Nine Old Men. Now, here's what you got to understand. And again, one of the things you have to take into account when you watch these things, this is you pulling up a chair and listening to your crazy Uncle F tell a story. I'm, don't hold me to the accuracy of any of the facts or statistics. Everything's just coming from here. I have no script. I didn't prepare for this at all. So, um, the stories that I tell and the education that I'm giving you is not, you can't set your watch by it. Okay. So, but as I understand it, the Nine Old Men were the core Disney animators, the ones who really sort of got the ball rolling at the company, who did Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and of course that was the movie that the company was built upon. Um, but these were people who sort of laid the foundation for how animation was produced. And what you have to remember at the time when, Disney had started, and consequently when other companies, when Warner Brothers had started doing animation and the Fleischers were doing their animation, when you go back far enough into animation history, you start to appreciate the fact that back in the days of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and all those early Disney efforts, there were no animation schools. There were, people were not professional animators. I've made finger quotes about 8,000 times in this talk already. But do you know what I mean? It's not like Walt decided, hey, I'm going to start this animation company. I'm going to pluck people from the best animation schools I can find and start my company. These were people who were just illustrators and cartoonists and people like that, classically trained artists. So they had to learn animation as they went, which is really kind of fascinating when you think about it, and how much innovating they had to do, and how much, my goodness, how much experimenting and how much they probably had to just figure stuff out as they went along. So again, one of the things I discovered when I moved to LA and I started, getting hip to all this stuff was where all the reverence came from. People would whisper the names, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston with such just absolute reverence and awe. And I finally sort of started to get it. It's like, okay, it's no wonder. And same goes for the Fleischer brothers and Chuck Jones, for Freeling, all those people, even, Hanna-Barbera, even though they came along on the slightly later side. These are, none of these people were born and said, I can't wait to be an animator. It's just the art form had not been around that long. So you can appreciate how these were just artists, people who knew how to draw and then figured out a way to do this stuff as they go along. So, point being, the Nine Old Men were very revered and still are, and always will be. But what you have to understand is, whereas you guys probably, when you think of famous animators, finger quotes again, you think of people like Craig McCracken, and you think of Genndy Tartakovsky, and you maybe even Peter Chung or Miyazaki, or anything from Studio Ghibli. Just like you're probably thinking in terms of the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but these guys go back even further than that. So when, in those days when people talked about animators, and for many, many decades since, and even now into modern times, when you talk about the history of animation, you can't not talk about Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. They literally wrote the book. And, the title of it is, of course, The Illusion of Life, and that's what animation is. And again, it was a concept that um, had not really been defined until the Disney era, the golden Disney era when they did all of their most famous movies again, beginning with Snow White, Cinderella, all that stuff. Because prior to that, a lot of the stuff you'd see, in movie theaters and stuff would be that kind of wacky, zany rubber hose type stuff. And again, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there was nothing about it that sort of tricked your eyes into thinking that you were watching something that existed in the real world, until these guys came along. So, point being, I had, sort of had an awakening with regard to Frank and Ollie, and like everyone else, I looked upon their work, and I certainly study the book diligently, and it's amazing what they accomplished. And so I finally sort of got what all the fuss was about. Whenever anyone would talk about the nine old men, then the nine old men, oh my gosh, the nine old men, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And meanwhile, at the time, the one of the biggest things that I'd seen and been influenced by was the Iron Giant by Brad Bird. As far as animated movies are concerned, I walked out of Iron Giant saying to myself, that is one of the very few perfect movies I've ever seen in my life. It is a perfect film from beginning to end. There is nothing that you can say bad about it. It is a perfectly told story, told with both traditional and what at the time was spooky, scary, cutting edge CGI. So, yeah, for me, the person that I had my eyes set on was Brad Bird, and I also had my eyes set on people like Peter Chung and a host of others that I thought were really sort of pushing the medium at the time that I was, getting my feet wet in the industry. Um, but of course, whenever you talk to Brad Bird, you would hear him talk about people like Glenn Keane, who did a bunch of the key stuff for Beauty and the Beast and Hunchback of Notre Dame, and a lot of the other sort of modern era, at least for the time, modern era Disney movies. But then, of course, both of them would talk about Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So, um, so of the people that I admired, these were sort of like the masters of the masters that I was looking to, and so because I admired Brad Bird and Glenn Keane so much, and they admired Frank and Ollie so much. I of course studied not just what Frank and Ollie did, but what Frank and Ollie did, and how people like Glenn and Brad took that stuff and extrapolated on it. And again, so did people like Craig and Gendy and so many other people that you think of when you think of animators today. So again, after a whole lot of just sort of learning by doing, which is what I was doing early in my career in Los Angeles at places like Klasky Chupo, and I think around this time I'd gotten my big break at Nickelodeon. By this time, I had really gained a reverence, the same reverence that so many animators have for Frank and Ollie. And it was right around this time that I had gotten some real juice in my career, some mojo. I had sold my pilot to Nickelodeon, The Tantrum, and there was a lot of buzz about it. And at the same time, I had Warner Brothers interested in buying one of my shows. I was generally kind of a hot commodity as someone to keep your eyes on in the animation industry. And I think I was probably somewhere around 28, 29 years old, which, again, by animation standards, that's actually kind of, for the time, it was kind of old. People were always looking for the hot young talent, and by hot young talent, they usually meant people coming right out of school at the age of like 22, 23, something like that. So, anyway, I was, I was being talked about as, oh, this guy's going to be the next Butch Hartman. blah blah blah. So and I was, in addition to the fact, I think at the time this was when I was still a director on the Fairly Odd Parents, but like I say, I'd sold a show. I'd had people interested in buying some of my other shows. I was getting invited to a lot of like sort of industry related parties and stuff, which I would of course use to like network and try and sell other shows and that sort of thing. So I was getting myself out there. Um, and like I said, I would get invited to a lot of stuff, especially industry related stuff, and I was becoming chummy with the people at Animation Magazine and the people, and I was seen regularly at the union meetings, and I would meet people there, and I would also go to um, events thrown by Women in Animation, which is a great organization. If you're in Los Angeles, look them up, because you don't have to be a woman to attend the Women in Animation meetings, or at least you didn't when I was around, because I was a regular there. Um, and by the way, this falls under the category of good advice for animators, especially if you're living in LA and you're trying to work it all. Man, show up to stuff, be seen, you know, meet people, hobnob, rub elbows. It's actually kind of fun, because I'm someone who I like meeting new people, and I sort of enjoy interviewing them and finding out what everyone's story was. And so it's, whether you like doing it or not, it's something that you kind of got to do if you want to get your name out there. So you might as well enjoy it. And like I say, just show up to these things, because the more of these things you show up to, the more things you get invited to. Vis-a-vis that, I got invited to the Animation Guild through I believe it was the Animation Guild. It was either the Animation Guild or the Directors Guild, through an event called A Night with Frank and Ollie, where it was going to, and it was hosted by Glenn Keane and I believe Brad Bird as well. Either it was either hosted by the two of them, or the two of them were present, or the two of them were, co-hosting, something like that. But anyway, um, so so I got invited, and I mean, it was in a theater, and there were, I don't know if it was a couple hundred seat theater near, on, or around the Directors Guild, but it was jam packed, and I got invited to go to this, and I went with a friend of mine, and of course we were very excited, and I personally was very excited about seeing Frank and Ollie, but I was actually more excited about seeing Brad Bird and Glenn Keane, because, like I said, those are the ones who, to me, were really, really, relevant to influencing my own, animation work. But I was excited about the whole thing, um, and I felt like super, just like, oh man, I am making it big if I'm at this event, because it was a very sort of who's who event. I was looking around, and there were, lots and lots of people, lots and lots of important people in the industry there. So um, so anyway, we get there, and we're in our seats. We're kind of waiting for everything to begin, and it is jam packed. I'm pretty sure it was in the middle of summertime, so it was hot, but it was formal, or at least it was semi formal. And I was sitting in the seat, and I was getting kind of antsy for the whole thing. And I remember at one point I was just like, "Hey, I want to go use the restroom, because the minute these guys start talking, I don't want to miss a word of it." So I get up and I go to the restroom, and here's where I just become the world's biggest jerk. I'm walking towards the bathroom, and as I'm walking towards the bathroom, um, and I'm real proud of myself for going at a time when no one else is going to the bathroom. Um, and it's like, oh, this is great. I won't have to wait. And by the way, it's 5 minutes till the thing is supposed to begin. So I'm just like, okay, I want to get this over with. So I'm walking towards the bathroom, and just as I'm approaching the door, two guys in wheelchairs pull in front of me from a different door and start going in the bathroom before me. Now, because I was a young-ish, self-centered, brat, essentially, I started thinking to myself, oh, here we go. These guys are going to take so much time and they're going to make me late. And I'm fretting now because I'm going to miss the opening remarks and blah, 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 blah. Of course, that's all I'm thinking about is how does this affect me? And so I'm walking behind them and they're the wheelchairs and there's two guys, they have assistants. There's two guys pushing their wheelchairs in, going incredibly slow. And um and so I'm just like, oh, come on, come on, come on. Let's move this along. Let's move this along. Let's move this along. So, so I get in there and I sidle up to the urinal and I, sort of start doing my business. And I hear from one of the stalls, somebody, presumably one of the guys pushing the wheelchair, says something along the lines of, Frank, Ollie's not done yet. Do you want to wait for Ollie? And I'm just like, oh my God, it's Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston are in the bathroom with me right at this particular moment. Holy cow, holy cow, holy cow. I'm in the bathroom with Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. Crap! Quite probably literally crap! So, immediately, as I'm standing there doing my own business at the urinal, I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then in the urinal next to me was Peter Chung. But now suddenly Peter Chung, who I admire tremendously, is completely overshadowed by the fact that we're all in the bathroom with Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So I'm like, what do I do? Because when am I ever going to have another opportunity to meet Frank and Ollie? Literally living legends. And by the way, quite clearly a million years old at this point. Not super, spry. So probably not going to be with us that much longer. What do I do in this situation? Do I go up to them in the bathroom and say, "Oh, Frank, Ollie, I'm a huge fan, and oh my goodness, I'm thrilled." Because I mean, my goodness, they're not going to want to talk to me. They're not going to hear that I did a cartoon called The Tantrum at Nickelodeon. They probably don't know what Nickelodeon is. And by the sounds of them, and by the sound of their conversation with their handlers, it didn't sound like they were firing on all cylinders too much. It just didn't. It just sounded like they were just incredibly old and feeble. And that really bummed me out because, I was looking forward to hearing them talk. And, whenever I would see footage of them from the old Disney footage of them sort of doing their thing at the Disney studios, one of the things they would always show them doing is them acting out their characters' poses and stuff like that. And these were just two very energized guys every time I would see them on film footage. And they were in a band and they were always playing music and they're both into trains and all this stuff. So it was a bittersweet occasion because I was like, you know what, I'm not going to bother them because frankly it sounds like they barely even know where they are. I'm not going to bug them, and that's going to be my gift to them. Is I'm not going to assault them in the bathroom moments before they get wheeled out on a stage. Where they're probably going to say 3 or 4 words, and then the evening will be over with. So I left the bathroom, and I go back to my seat, and I'm sitting next to my friend, and I'm clearly bummed, and she's like, "What's the matter?" And I'm like, I just ran into Frank and Ollie, and I'm like, I'm glad we're here, but I don't think this is going to be a very exciting talk. I think this is going to be sort of Glenn and Brad doing a lot of the heavy lifting while this turns into one of those things where, yes, they're giving the award to the super, super old person, and the old person gives one of those just really long, drawn out speeches that's mostly, just sounds like, well, I would like to say this, and I thought that's what the whole evening is going to be. And by the way, I know you're sitting there going, wow, F is a jerk. And trust me, I couldn't agree more. I have since tried to make amends and correct my overall attitude about everything, but yes, I was an absolute jerk for thinking the way I was. So anyway, so please, I mean, look, if you need to tell me what a jerk I am in the comment section, go ahead. I've got it coming. Just rest assured, I already know. So anyway, I get out of the bathroom. I go back to my seat. I tell my friend, this is gonna be painful to watch because we're gonna watch two guys who are I'm pretty sure they were both either 100 or closing in on 100, and I'm like it's just gonna be painful to watch. They're not gonna have anything to say, and what they do say is probably not gonna be very relevant. And so we're sitting there, and finally, they you know either Brad or Glenn or both announce, "Hey, everybody! Frank, Thomas, and Ollie Johnston." Crowd goes wild, of course. Um, and to my surprise, they both, walked out, and it immediately had a seat, before the talk began. And again, I was sitting there going, "Oh, here it goes. This is it's going to be painful." And by golly, um, Glenn, Brad are both start interviewing them, and um, out of nowhere, the two just come to life, and it's like, and then this happened, and Walt, and and Snow White, and Cinderella, and Jungle Book, they were, sorry for the pun, animated. They were alive, they were animated, and this was no illusion. This was them the way I had hoped and prayed and expected to see them. And they clearly had a blast. Everybody there had a blast, and there was a Q&A, and they just, everything they said was like spun gold. It was relevant, and it was educational and inspirational, and if nothing else, I walked out of there going, wow, there they are. That um, they're that alive, even though they're pushing 100 or in their hundreds, and still passionate, and still and by the way, still friends. And how do I know they're still friends? Because I heard them in the bathroom, and the kind of conversations that were going back and forth were not the type you have with someone that you're not really good friends with. So much to my delight, I got served a giant piece of humble pie that day, and it as I said, um, the whole night, all the Q&A, everything like that, just wound up being absolutely amazing. I can't possibly try and tell you, everything they had said or anything like that. Just know that I walked out of it reinvigorated for the craft of animation, the art form of animation, and an even greater appreciation for the history behind it. So, look, if you want something akin to what I experienced, go out and get this book and give it a good solid read. But so that was my brush with animation royalty. It was an amazing occasion, and yes, I learned a lot about animation, but I also learned a lot about myself and how capable I am of being, frankly, a colossal douchebag, and how I should never jump to those kinds of conclusions. And boy, it's an old platitude, but the whole "don't judge a book by its cover" thing really slapped me in the face that day. So so that was it, and like I said, I walked away invigorated and inspired. So that was my brush with animation royalty Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So I hope you enjoyed this little tale. As I've prefaced before, keep in mind names, dates, and everything else may have been entirely fouled up because I'm just going off my memory. There's no script, and I didn't bother doing any research for any of this. Um, please let me reiterate, if you enjoyed this, obviously, I would love to hear your comments in the section, your comments in the comment section. If you have ideas for things you would like me to talk about, please leave them there. Please, you can also reach out to me on X, at Fountain Cartoon. I'm very approachable, and I love talking to new people. And of course, here at Fountain's Pen Cartoons, the channel, please, please, please like, share, and subscribe. Like I said, we are in the process of working really hard to make you a whole variety of new cartoons. And I really think you guys are going to go bonkers for them. So thanks for tuning in to yet another edition of F-Bombs. Yeah, by the way, best dad in the galaxy. Take that, Craig McCracken. Thanks for tuning in again, and I'll, as long as you guys keep letting me know that you enjoy these, I'll keep making them. So until the next one, zigga zigga, party people.